Every night, she knelt there, facing the wall, starving, waiting for a place at the table that was never meant for her. But tonight, something changed. Her stepmother thought she was invisible, but when the father walked through the door, he saw everything. She realized she wasn't invited when the chair disappeared, not removed loudly, not dragged away, just gone. The dining room was already warm with voices by the time she reached the doorway. Plates clinked. Someone laughed too hard. The chandelier hummed softly above the table, its light spilling across polished wood and folded napkins. 8 place settings, silver aligned, water glasses filled. 7 people sat down. The 8th chair, the small one at the end, had been pushed back against the wall. "Stop right there." The girl froze. Her stepmother didn't turn around when she spoke. She was smoothing the tablecloth, adjusting a fork by a fraction of an inch, the picture of calm precision. Her voice carried no anger. It didn't need to. "You'll eat later," she said. "Family dinner is for those who know how to behave." The girl's hands curled slowly into the hem of her sweater. She was 8, too young to argue, old enough to understand what exclusion felt like when it landed without explanation. "I was quiet today," she said, barely above a whisper. Her stepmother finally looked at her then, not with cruelty, not with warmth, but with the practiced neutrality of someone correcting a mistake. "Quiet doesn't mean respectful," she replied. "Go." She placed a small plate into the girl's hands. 1 piece of bread. A thin smear of something pale across it, not enough to drop crumbs, not enough to stain the carpet. "Kitchen steps," the woman added, "and don't come back in here." The girl turned away before anyone else could notice her. She moved carefully, as if sound itself might earn her punishment. The laughter behind her grew louder as she crossed the hallway. Someone pulled out a chair, someone else raised a glass. No one asked where she went. She sat on the bottom step of the kitchen staircase, knees tucked close to her chest, plate balanced on her lap. The overhead light had been turned off. Only the faint glow from the dining room reached her, warm, golden, unreachable. She counted the bites before taking the first one. 1, 2, 3. Eat slow, make it last. Her ears strained toward the sound of voices drifting through the vents. Her stepmother's laugh floated above the rest. Light, musical, practiced. Compliments followed it. Praise for the house, the food, the way everything looked so perfect. The girl chewed carefully, swallowing before the tears could rise. Crying made things worse. Crying turned into attitude. She had learned that early. She glanced toward the doorway. From where she sat, she could see the edge of the dining room table, the white tablecloth, the legs of chairs, shoes shifting, a napkin falling to the floor and being picked up again. She could also see the empty space where her chair should have been. It was a small thing, a gap most people wouldn't notice, but to her it felt enormous, like proof that she didn't belong to the picture everyone else was admiring. Her bread was gone too soon. She licked the faint taste from her fingers, then folded the napkin carefully and tucked it into her pocket. Later, she would hide it under her pillow. Later, she might need it. The laughter swelled again. Someone mentioned how well the household ran, how disciplined children needed to be these days. Her stepmother agreed, nodding as though the thought had been waiting just for her. "Yes," she said, "they need to learn their place." The girl flinched, even from the hallway. She leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. She imagined the chair pulled out again, imagined climbing into it, imagined her feet not quite reaching the floor the way they used to. But imagination was dangerous. It made reality hurt more when it returned. So instead, she whispered the numbers again, counted the seconds between voices, between bites she no longer had. When the dining room door closed partway, shutting her out completely, the silence pressed in. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just sat there in the dark, listening to a family eat dinner without her, wondering how many nights it would take before the chair stopped feeling like it had ever been hers at all. And upstairs, unseen, the smallest place at the table remained empty, waiting for someone who hadn't yet noticed she was missing. Each day, the rules changed. Some days, it was because she walked too slowly, her feet dragging just a little longer than anyone else's. Other days, it was because she had spoken too quickly, her voice a bit too eager, as if she couldn't wait to be part of the conversation. Sometimes she was told she wasn't silent enough, too much movement in her chair, her hand twitching before it could be held still. And other times, she was too still, her gaze too vacant, her head held at an angle that suggested she wasn't paying attention, too eager, too slow, too quiet, too much. None of it made sense, none of it was ever the same. The rules moved like the sand beneath her feet, shifting constantly so she could never stand firm. Her stepmother would watch from across the room, her expression carefully neutral, and when she spoke, it was always the same tone, polite, controlled, unwavering, the kind of voice that made it clear this wasn't a request, it was instruction. Stand up straight. Don't look at the table. Stop fidgeting. Be quiet. Wait. She could never guess what it would be next, but it didn't matter. There was always a next. The worst part was when the rules shifted and she couldn't see why. The shifting punishments felt like a game she didn't understand, a test where the answer was always wrong, no matter how careful she was. Some nights after dinner she would be told to stand still in the corner of the room, facing the wall. Her knees would begin to ache from the long hours of standing there. The other children, her siblings as they called themselves, would scatter off to their rooms, and the sounds of their laughter or chatting would fade as the house quieted down. But she would stay, standing, facing the wall. The other chairs pushed in, their owners content, their meals complete. You'll eat later. The words felt like a trap. Later never came. And when she asked, when she dared to ask, her stepmother would simply answer, "You've already eaten." Her hunger was something to be ashamed of. But no matter how quietly she asked for a plate, how carefully she tried to help, she was told, "Not yet. Not tonight." The rules shifted again. The next day, it was something else. "You'll eat last. Go to your room. Stay out of the way." The girl learned to keep her movements small, to breathe quietly, to avoid looking at anyone for too long. She learned that too much attention would make her invisible in a different way. The best way to avoid the shifting rules was to be small, to fade into the walls and not draw any more attention than necessary, to be just enough to stay unnoticed. The silence between them grew. At first, she hadn't even understood the rules. She had tried to be polite, tried to follow what her stepmother told her, but after a while it became clear. No matter how much she tried to be quiet, to help, to stay still, it was never enough. There was always something else. Too much, too little, too eager, too quiet. And the more she tried, the more she realized the rules would never stop changing. She could never win. Not like this. One evening, she was standing by the kitchen counter, washing the dishes. Her stepmother, sitting at the dining table with a guest, had given her a simple task to clean up. The girl, her back straight, worked quietly, her hands moving carefully, as if the rhythm of the task would offer her some sense of calm. "Are you done?" her stepmother asked, her voice cool and distant. The girl hesitated. Almost. She wanted to say yes, but couldn't, because she wasn't. She never felt done. Her stepmother's eyes flicked over her, sizing her up. Then, in the quietest of voices, as if it were just another mundane observation, she spoke. "You're always trying too hard, aren't you? Trying to be so perfect. You're eager. But that's not how things work around here." The words were a knife hidden in velvet. The girl couldn't breathe. For a moment. Try again. Stay back. Wait. Wait. Wait until it was too late. Wait until she had been erased for good. As the days went on, she learned that waiting was the only thing that kept her in the game. The more she waited, the more she observed, the less she was seen, the less she mattered. But when she could, she would eat whatever crumbs she had hidden in her pockets. It was safer that way. Sometimes, when she was alone, she would touch the chair at the table. Not to sit, not yet. Just to feel it. Just to remind herself that she still existed in some small way. The table, the chairs, the voices, they were part of a world she couldn't reach, but they existed. And so did she. Her knees were starting to ache from the hours of kneeling, but she kept still, trying not to draw attention. The family's voices, growing louder, filling the house again, didn't matter anymore. They were not for her. They were not for someone like her. The chair would stay empty, waiting, for a long time, just like her place in this house. Hunger started to change everything. At first, it was just the quiet gnawing in her stomach, the rumble that came when the dinner bell rang, but she wasn't allowed to eat. She didn't really notice it then. But as the days stretched on, as the hours of kneeling facing the wall lengthened, Hunger became a constant companion, a companion she couldn't escape from. She learned how to make it last. She wasn't given much. The small piece of bread that had been placed in her hands, the scraps that were tossed her way, the leftovers that no one else wanted, these were the only meals she had, and even those weren't guaranteed. Some nights she went to bed with her stomach aching, empty, the pain a reminder of how far removed she was from the family at the table. She couldn't ask for more. It was forbidden. The stepmother had made that clear with her smooth voice, her practiced calm. "You'll eat later." Later never came. So the girl learned to save what she could. She tucked bits of bread under her sleeve, slid pieces of fruit into her pocket when no one was looking, and stashed them carefully in places no one would think to look. Behind her pillow, inside an old book she no longer read, the edges of her coat. Her pockets were always full, but it wasn't enough. It never felt like enough. There were days when she sat in the kitchen, waiting for the others to finish their meals. She would stare at the empty plate in front of her, imagining the food, the warmth, the way it would fill her up. But when she was finally given something, just a small slice of bread or a spoonful of soup, she would eat it so slowly, counting each bite, making it last as long as possible. 1, 2, 3. She measured the pieces. She counted the seconds between each bite. If she could make it last long enough, maybe the hunger wouldn't feel so unbearable. But it always did. The laughter from the dining room continued, as always. Her stepmother's voice, rising above the others, the way she praised the meal, the home, the perfect balance she maintained in everything. The girl could hear it all from the kitchen, the sound of a family who wasn't missing her. The girl kept her head down, hands clasped in her lap, and continued eating, pretending it didn't hurt, pretending she wasn't still hungry. She swallowed each bite carefully, feeling it slide down her throat, hoping that if she ate slowly enough, the hunger would stay hidden long enough to fade. Some nights, she didn't even have to eat. She had learned that if she waited, stayed quiet enough, someone would come. Rosa sometimes would slip into the kitchen after dinner, her movements quick and quiet. She would leave a small piece of toast on the counter, a glass of milk, just enough for the girl to feel like she wasn't invisible. But Rosa's kindness couldn't fill the hole. It was only a temporary relief. The hunger never fully went away. It just hung in the background, always there, always pressing against her ribs. And sometimes, when she was really tired, really hungry, she would reach under her pillow and pull out the crumbs she had saved. She would eat them in secret, sitting alone in the dark, her stomach quieting for the moment. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was enough to make the night bearable. The rules were shifting again, though. The girl could feel it. It wasn't just the food. It was everything. The stepmother's gaze, the way she moved through the house with that calm control, the way she always kept the family together, always kept everyone in their place. The girl felt like she didn't belong to any of it. The hunger wasn't just physical anymore. It was a reminder of how far away she was from everything that mattered. She wasn't even sure if she was still supposed to be part of this family. The longer she went without sitting at the table, without sharing in the meals, the more she began to think she was never meant to. 1, 2, 3. She counted the crumbs, and when they were gone, she would hide her empty plate and wait for the next day to start, hoping she could make it last, hoping for something more than silence. She counted every bite, every second, every piece of bread. And as she sat there, the voices from the dining room growing louder, the laughter rising, she knew it would never be enough. Not until she was seen. Not until she had a place at the table. Rosa began to notice the changes. At first, it was small things. The girl's clothes had become looser, the fabric hanging more loosely on her frame. Her movements were slower now, like her body was weighed down by something invisible, something deeper than the hunger she barely admitted to herself. But Rosa noticed. She always noticed. The girl, who had once been bright and active, now kept her gaze low, her steps more hesitant. Her hands were always busy, clutching at her dress at the hem of her sleeves, as if trying to hold herself together. But Rosa saw the fragility that couldn't be hidden. She saw the quiet desperation in the girl's eyes when she thought no one was looking. It didn't take long for Rosa to realize that it wasn't just the hunger. It was the hunger for attention, the hunger for belonging, the need to be seen, to be noticed. Rosa would catch glimpses of the girl when she passed through the hallways, or when she cleaned the windows in the kitchen. The girl would be there, usually standing by the wall or sitting alone in a corner, as if waiting for something, anything to happen. She never said much. In fact, she never said anything at all unless spoken to. But Rosa could see the changes. She could see how thin the girl had become, how pale her skin looked, how listless her movements had become, like someone who had long stopped caring about being noticed. The girl had started to blend into the background, becoming as quiet and still as the furniture in the house. One day, after a particularly difficult dinner, Rosa saw the girl again, standing by the kitchen counter. She was holding a small plate with a sliver of bread, her fingers trembling slightly as she turned it over and over. Rosa stood there for a moment watching, unsure of what to say. "Are you hungry?" Rosa asked softly, knowing the answer. The girl glanced up, her eyes wide for just a moment, before quickly looking down again. "I'm fine," she murmured. Rosa knew better. She knew the girl wasn't fine. She had seen the way she looked at the family during dinner, the way her eyes would linger on the food, the way she would slowly pull away as the others filled their plates, as the laughter swelled around them. Rosa didn't say anything more, but she moved silently through the kitchen, her footsteps light. She placed a small piece of toast on the counter, just enough for the girl to notice without drawing attention. "Eat," Rosa whispered, barely moving her lips. The girl looked at the bread, then at Rosa, as if she couldn't believe it was real. For a moment, she just stood there, eyes wide, before she picked it up carefully and took a small bite, chewing slowly as though savoring every morsel. Rosa watched her, her heart heavy. She had seen it before. The girl would eat slowly, deliberately, trying to make it last as long as possible. She had seen the girl eat crumbs from the floor, a small bit of apple slipped into her pocket, and hidden pieces of bread tucked away in her coat. Rosa knew the girl wasn't just hungry, she was starving for attention, for validation, for someone to notice that she was there, to give her something to hold on to in this house that had become a prison of silence. Rosa could see the pattern. She could see how the girl's movements had become more careful, more calculated, as though she was trying to make herself smaller, to avoid being noticed, to avoid drawing the stepmother's attention. The girl had learned that to survive here, she had to be invisible. But Rosa wasn't blind. She had seen it from the start. She had seen how the stepmother treated the girl differently from the others, how she spoke to her with that practiced, neutral tone, how she gave her less food, how she made her kneel facing the wall while the others sat at the table and ate. Rosa knew it wasn't right. But what could she do? She was just the maid, just the one who cleaned up after dinner, who made sure everything was in order. But something inside her was shifting. Something was changing in the way she saw the girl. She had never been one to speak up. She had learned to keep her head down, to stay out of the way, to never ask questions. But now she couldn't stand it anymore. She couldn't keep watching this child disappear in front of her eyes, couldn't keep pretending that this was just discipline. It wasn't discipline. It was cruelty. One afternoon, after hearing a particularly harsh exchange between the girl and her stepmother, Rosa found herself walking toward the pantry, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew it was wrong. She knew she was stepping into dangerous territory. But she couldn't help it. She opened the door quietly, her hands shaking as she searched through the shelves for something she had seen before, a letter from the father, a simple note with a name and contact information. The letter had slipped through the cracks once, but Rosa had seen it, and she remembered the name. Michael Grant. She pulled it from the shelf and held it in her hands, her fingers trembling as she read the name again. Then she turned and moved toward the phone, her heart pounding. For a moment she hesitated, her mind racing with doubt. Was this the right thing to do? Was she going too far? But she couldn't watch the girl suffer anymore. Rosa dialed the number. Her fingers felt cold on the phone, her breath shallow as she waited for the line to connect. The phone rang once, twice, and then, on the third ring, a man's voice answered. "Grant." Rosa's heart skipped a beat. She took a deep breath, her voice low but steady. "Mr. Grant, my name is Rosa. I work in your daughter's home." The line went silent for a moment. "Lily," she whispered, "she's not well. She's been kept from the table. She's being treated badly, and I can't stand it anymore. It's happening every night, Mr. Grant. It's been weeks." There was a long pause on the other end. The sound of the man's breath was controlled but sharp. "Where is she?" His voice was calm, but Rosa could hear the edge in it. "Now." She's upstairs, in her room, Rosa replied. She's been kept there, kept away from everything. But I'm telling you, sir, it's not right. He was quiet for a moment. Stay close, he said. I'm coming home. Now. The line clicked. Rosa stood there, the phone still pressed to her ear, her heart racing. She felt something shift in the air, a sense of urgency that hadn't been there before. She was no longer alone in this. She wasn't the only one who could see what was happening. And for the first time in a long while, Rosa allowed herself to hope. The next day, after the evening had passed in silence, the house felt like it was holding its breath. The girl spent most of the morning cleaning the kitchen, moving quietly from counter to counter, making sure everything was in its place. Her mind was numb, the hunger gnawing at her in waves, but she didn't dare express it. She had learned that hunger was something that needed to be hidden, a weakness she couldn't afford to show. The stepmother was speaking to a guest in the dining room, her voice calm, even like she was giving a lecture. Discipline, the stepmother said, her words drifting through the open door. It's the key to everything, you know. A well-run household needs structure. Structure is what makes children behave properly. They need to know their place. The girl paused, her fingers still on the dish she was drying. She felt the words like a cold draft, sinking deep into her chest. She had heard this before, but it never sounded like discipline. It never sounded like something that was meant to help her. The stepmother's voice continued, like a song she had sung for years, rehearsed and perfected, as if it were the only way to raise a child properly. Children today are far too spoiled. They think they deserve things without earning them. They expect attention, food, comfort, all without doing anything to earn it. They believe the world revolves around them. The girl's chest tightened, the words like weights settling over her. She thought of the meals she was denied, the chair that had been pushed away from the table, and the hours spent kneeling, facing the wall. She hadn't asked for anything. She hadn't expected anything. But still, she had been denied. And the worst part, the stepmother continued, her voice calm and steady, is that when you give them what they want without making them earn it, you ruin them, you spoil them, you teach them they can take what they want, when they want, with no consequences. The girl's hands trembled as she set the dish down. She didn't dare look up, didn't dare let the stepmother see the confusion, the hurt in her eyes. Discipline is about teaching them to respect authority, the stepmother said. It's about earning what you get in life. The girl's mind raced, her heart pounding. Earn it. That was the rule. But the more she tried, the more she realized that nothing she did ever seemed to be enough. Her quiet, respectful behavior, her attempts to follow the rules, never gained her a place at the table. The stepmother had never given her that chance. She had never been allowed to earn it. The stepmother's voice softened, her tone almost affectionate as she spoke to the guest. You see, children need structure. They need boundaries. Without boundaries, they'll grow up thinking they can get whatever they want. And that's not how the world works. The girl felt a strange pang in her chest. The rules were always changing. The boundaries were never clear. She never knew when she was doing things right, and every time she thought she was getting it, she found herself being punished in some other way, for some other reason. The stepmother had set the rules, but the rules were never the same. There was always some new way for her to be wrong. She tried so hard. She did everything she was told. She stayed quiet, kept her head down, avoided making mistakes. She had even tried to be invisible, to shrink into the walls of the house, to be small enough to be unnoticed. But it wasn't enough. The stepmother continued speaking, unaware of the girl standing in the kitchen, listening. It's not about being cruel. It's about teaching them responsibility, teaching them the value of hard work. The only way to learn responsibility is by being held accountable. The girl squeezed her eyes shut, willing the tears not to come. She didn't understand. She had tried to do everything right, but it felt like it would never be enough. She wanted to prove to her stepmother that she could earn her place, that she was worth something. But the rules were always changing. Every time she thought she had earned her seat at the table, the rules shifted again. You'll see, the stepmother continued, discipline makes them better people. It makes them learn to take care of themselves. You can't spoil them and expect them to grow up to be decent people. The girl's chest tightened. She had learned. She had learned how to survive in this house, how to stay quiet, how to fade into the background. She had learned how to disappear, how to make herself invisible so she wouldn't be noticed. But she wasn't sure anymore if she could take it. If she could keep going, kneeling in the corner, waiting for a seat that would never come. "You'll see," the stepmother repeated, this time with more conviction, more confidence in her own judgment. "In the end, they'll thank you. They'll understand why you made them wait, why you made them earn their place at the table. They'll appreciate it. They'll be better for it." The girl heard the words, but they didn't feel true. She didn't feel better. She didn't feel like she was earning anything. She just felt like she was disappearing. And that's exactly what the stepmother wanted. The rules, the punishment, the constant shifting. It was all a game to her, a game where the girl could never win. No matter how hard she tried, no matter how much she shrank into herself, it was never enough. She would never be enough. The girl stood there, trying to keep her face blank, trying to hide the hurt she felt. But it was impossible. She had tried to do what was expected, but all she had gotten in return was more rules, more silence, more rejection. The stepmother finished her lecture, her words hanging in the air like a weight. The girl stood frozen in the kitchen, her hands clenched tightly at her sides, the tears threatening to break free. But she swallowed them back, knowing that crying would only make things worse. The stepmother's voice was already fading, but the girl's silence remained. And in that silence, she knew one thing for sure. No matter how much she tried, she would never earn a place at this table. The house was buzzing with excitement when the stepmother made the announcement. "We're having a proper dinner tonight," she said, her voice light and cheerful as she moved through the hall, adjusting her dress and smoothing the folds of her apron. "Everyone will be present." The words hung in the air like a promise. The girl froze. For a moment she wasn't sure if she had heard right. She didn't dare ask, didn't dare speak, for fear that it was just another trick, another false hope that would leave her disappointed. But this time, there was something in the stepmother's tone that made her believe it might be real. For once, it felt like she was being included. The girl's heart fluttered in her chest, and she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in weeks: hope. This time, she wouldn't be ignored. This time, maybe the chair would be pulled out for her, just like it was for the others. She would sit at the table. She would eat the meal like everyone else. She would prove she deserved to be there. The girl quickly finished cleaning the kitchen, her movements sharper, more urgent. Everything had to be perfect. She washed her hands meticulously, making sure they were spotless. She didn't want to make any mistake that would ruin her chance. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She even tried to smile as she looked at herself in the hallway mirror, adjusting her dress. The mirror reflected a child with wide, nervous eyes, standing on the edge of something unknown. She had no idea what would happen, but she couldn't help feeling like this time was different. She moved through the house like it was a sacred ritual, each step taken with purpose. She had earned it. She had done everything right. She had stayed silent, stayed still. She had waited. Tonight she would have a seat at the table. The stepmother had already set the dining room, and the girl could see through the open door as the family gathered. The plates were perfectly aligned, the napkins neatly folded, and the glasses filled. Everything was exactly as it should be. And there, at the end of the table, was her chair. The chair she had seen pushed back against the wall for so long, now positioned perfectly, waiting for her to sit in it. She could feel the excitement building inside her as she moved closer. This was it. This was her moment. But just as she reached the doorway, her stepmother's voice stopped her. "Not so fast," she said as she looked up from her place at the table. "You haven't been told where to sit." The girl froze in her tracks, her heart skipping a beat. Her stepmother, still calm as ever, lifted one of the place cards and studied it for a moment, her fingers lightly brushing the edges of the card. She glanced back at the girl, who was standing there in the doorway, waiting for permission, waiting to be called. The stepmother smiled, a thin, practiced smile. She didn't seem angry or cruel. She was simply in control. "Tonight you'll wait." The girl's stomach twisted, a sick feeling spreading through her. She looked at the chair. It was there. It was ready. "For what?" the girl asked, her voice barely a whisper. "For us to finish," the stepmother said, the smile still on her face, but colder now. "Consider it a lesson in patience." The girl didn't speak. She didn't know what to say. Her stepmother turned back to the table as if the conversation was over, and the others continued to eat, unaffected by what had just happened. The girl's hope evaporated like a fading breath, leaving her cold and numb. She stood still in the doorway, feeling the weight of her failure crush her chest. She had thought this would be the night. This night, she would have her place, her seat at the table, just like everyone else. But she had been wrong. As the laughter and conversation grew louder, the girl's feet felt like they were rooted to the floor, frozen in place. She looked at the empty chair again, her seat, the place that should have been hers. She wanted to move, but she couldn't. She wanted to leave, but she was stuck. The stepmother was right. She wasn't ready. She would never be ready. Her stepmother's voice cut through the air again, casual and dismissive. "Go to the kitchen. Stay out of the way." The girl turned slowly, her legs heavy, and walked away, the sound of laughter echoing in her ears. She went back to the kitchen, back to the place where she would wait again. Wait for the family to finish. Wait for her seat at the table to remain empty. It was the hunger that made her weak. Not just the empty stomach, not just the aching ribs or the constant dizziness. It was the weight of everything that had built up, day after day of exclusion, silence, rejection. She had been holding it all in, hoping for something to change. But the truth was, it never did. The rules didn't change. The family didn't change. She was still invisible. And it was that invisibility that was starting to crush her. She had spent so many nights kneeling in that corner, facing the wall, waiting for her stepmother's approval. She had spent hours silently counting the seconds between bites, counting the pieces of bread, the crumbs. She had convinced herself that if she just endured long enough, if she stayed quiet enough, she would eventually be allowed to sit at the table. But nothing ever changed. And now, as she stood in the kitchen again, clutching her empty plate, she could feel her legs giving out. She wasn't just physically exhausted, she was emotionally spent, drained from the years of trying to earn a place that was never truly hers. The laughter from the dining room reached her ears, but it sounded muffled, far away. Her world was closing in on her, the weight of the empty chair at the table pressing down on her chest. She had been waiting for a chance, for someone to see her, to recognize that she existed, but it never came. The silence around her was deafening. One step. She tried to move, but her body refused. 2 steps. Her head spun, the room tilting. She couldn't breathe. 3 steps. And then everything went black. She felt herself stumbling, the world around her tilting, her knees buckling beneath her. The next thing she knew, she was on the floor, her body trembling, her breath shallow and uneven. Her vision was blurred, the sounds around her muffled and distant. The laughter from the dining room was still there, but it felt like it belonged to someone else. She could hear footsteps approaching, but she couldn't move, couldn't speak. She was trapped in her own body, in her own silence, unable to escape the crushing weight of her isolation. A voice broke through the fog, sharp and cutting through the haze. "Stop that! Get up!" The girl's eyes fluttered open, and she saw her stepmother standing above her. Her face was cold, detached, as always. There was no concern in her voice, no trace of compassion, just a command. "Get up." The girl's body didn't obey. She could feel the weakness in her limbs, the exhaustion in every muscle. She tried to push herself up, but her arms gave out, and she collapsed back onto the cold floor. Her stepmother's gaze remained steady. She didn't rush to help. She didn't even offer a hand. Instead, she stepped back, her tone condescending. "You're just being dramatic," she said. "Get up. Stop making this a bigger deal than it is." The words cut deeper than any punishment. The girl's chest tightened as she lay there, motionless, the sting of rejection sharper than the physical pain. She wasn't allowed to collapse. She wasn't allowed to feel anything. She wasn't allowed to be anything. Rosa appeared then, her face filled with concern, her eyes softening when she saw the girl lying on the floor. Without hesitation, she knelt beside her. "Sweetheart," Rosa whispered, her voice breaking through the harshness of the moment. "Can you hear me?" The girl's eyes fluttered open, just enough to see Rosa's face, kind and gentle. The girl nodded faintly, her head heavy against the floor. "Shh," Rosa murmured, her hand resting gently on the girl's shoulder. "You're going to be okay. Just breathe. I'm here." The stepmother's voice interrupted, cold as always. "Clean that up," she said, her tone unbothered. "She's being dramatic." Rosa didn't move. She didn't look at the stepmother. Instead, she kept her focus on the girl, the child who had been broken by the house she lived in, the house that had erased her piece by piece. Rosa didn't see a drama. She saw pain, real suffering. "No," Rosa replied, her voice steady and firm, a quiet rebellion. No, she's not. For the first time, Rosa didn't lower her gaze. She didn't look away. She looked straight into the stepmother's eyes, her own gaze unwavering. She's not being dramatic, Rosa repeated, each word carefully chosen, carefully aimed. She's starving, and you've let this go on long enough. The stepmother's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a tight smile, as if the words meant nothing, as if the girl's collapse didn't matter. She needs discipline, the stepmother said, her voice calm and final, like a verdict. She needs care, Rosa replied, her voice a little stronger. She needs help. There was a tense silence. The stepmother looked at Rosa, her expression unreadable, but the girl could feel the change, the shift in the air. Something was happening, something she couldn't quite understand yet, but it was there. Rosa stayed where she was, her hand resting on the girl's shoulder, holding her in place. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the girl wasn't alone. Rosa helped the girl sit up, the girl's head still spinning, but Rosa's presence offering her a sense of grounding. She wasn't alone anymore. For the first time, someone saw her. Someone cared. The girl tried to stand on her own, but Rosa's steady hand was there, gently guiding her. And though the room still felt heavy, though the air still felt thick with rejection and loneliness, for one brief moment, the girl had something else, the knowledge that she wasn't invisible. And that was all she needed to hold on to. The weight of it all, everything she had seen, everything the girl had endured, settled heavily on Rosa's chest. She couldn't pretend anymore. She couldn't keep watching the girl disappear, knowing that the stepmother's cruelty was slowly erasing her from existence. Rosa had spent weeks, months witnessing the subtle abuse. She had seen the girl grow thinner, quieter, smaller each day. But it wasn't just the hunger that had caught her attention. It was the psychological manipulation, the way the girl was forced to shrink into herself. The punishment was never spoken, but it was there, hanging in the air like an invisible cloud. Rosa couldn't ignore it any longer. She had watched as the girl's eyes grew dull, her energy drained, her body weakened, while the family ate their meals, laughing, oblivious to the child who was left to starve in silence. And now, the girl had collapsed, physically broken from the weight of it all. Rosa knew it was time to act. She went to the pantry. The pantry, where the household records were kept, was always off limits to her, but this time, Rosa didn't hesitate. She had a purpose. She knew what she had to do. The stepmother's control had already turned the girl's life into a cage, but Rosa wouldn't let it happen any longer. She needed proof that would force someone to see. She rifled through the shelves, her fingers trembling as she pulled out the letter from the father, Michael Grant. The one that had slipped through unnoticed, hidden away by the stepmother, never to be mentioned. The one that now carried the weight of truth. Michael Grant's name was printed at the top, a name that had never once entered the conversation in the house. But Rosa remembered it. She had seen it when the stepmother handled the mail, the formal, cold letterhead, the sharply written notes. Rosa stood still for a moment, the letter in her hands. She could feel the heaviness of what she was about to do, the danger of it. But there was something else, too. Relief. Relief that she wasn't alone in this anymore, that the truth would come to light. With the letter firmly in her hands, she moved toward the phone. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for the first time in weeks her hands weren't shaking from fear, they were shaking from the urgency of the decision. She dialed the number, each digit feeling too loud in the quiet house. The phone rang. Once. Twice. Her breath came faster, but she didn't falter. She couldn't. The third ring felt like an eternity. And then, finally, the line clicked. Grant. The voice on the other end was calm, controlled. Rosa swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Grant," she said, almost afraid to continue. "My name is Rosa. I work in your daughter's home." There was a brief pause, a breath held on the other end of the line. And then the voice softened, more alert, more focused. "My daughter?" he asked slowly. "Lily?" Rosa's heart raced. This was it. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice stronger now. "She's not well. She's been kept from the table. She's been treated badly, sir." Night after night. Tonight she collapsed. I couldn't stand it anymore. Rosa took a deep breath as she spoke, the words coming in a rush now, a release after weeks of witnessing the girl's suffering. "It's been happening for weeks. She's not eating. She's being forced to stay out of the way. She's being punished for things she didn't do. The silence on the other end was profound. For a moment it felt like time had stopped. The weight of the words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. "Where is she now?" Michael Grant asked, his voice suddenly more urgent, more cutting than before. Rosa looked toward the hallway. She could feel the tension in the house, the quiet of the night pressing in on her. "She's upstairs," Rosa replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "In her room, but I'm telling you, sir, it's not right. She's being kept there, kept away from everything." Michael's response was sharp, clear. "I'm coming home. Now." Rosa's heart skipped a beat. She had done it. She had taken the first step. The truth was out. The line clicked, and Rosa stood still, the phone still in her hand. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to breathe. She wasn't alone anymore. She had done what she could. She had broken the silence. But now there was no turning back. Rosa quickly moved through the house, her feet light, but her mind heavy with what had just happened. She didn't stop to think about the consequences. She didn't care anymore. The girl was safe, and that was all that mattered. The sound of tires crunching on gravel echoed through the night, sharp and deliberate, signaling the arrival of Michael Grant. Inside the house, the steady hum of conversation continued, the family's meal moving forward as though nothing had changed. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the sound of chairs scraping against the floor, all of it continued, uninterrupted. But then the front door opened. It was firm, deliberate, a sound that shattered the calmness in the house, sending ripples through the quiet evening. Michael Grant stepped inside, his presence as commanding as the sound of the door closing behind him. His suit was slightly wrinkled from travel, but his posture was straight, his expression unwavering. His eyes scanned the room, a brief glance taking in the polished perfection of the house, the dining table set so carefully, so perfectly. But then, his gaze shifted. His eyes moved to the far end of the table where the empty chair sat, still pushed back, untouched, out of place. "Where's Lily?" he asked, his voice calm but cutting through the room like a blade. The stepmother, who had been sitting at the table with the guests, paused. For a moment the laughter faltered, the atmosphere shifting slightly, just enough to make her glance at Michael. But the smile didn't falter. She was still the picture of composure, of control. She stood up, her movements smooth and calculated. "She wasn't feeling well," she said, her tone light, as if the matter were trivial. "We thought it best she rest." Michael didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked further into the room, his eyes locked on the empty chair. The others at the table went silent, watching him, waiting. But he was only focused on one thing, the chair, the space, the absence. He took another step closer. His gaze never left the chair. "Since when does she miss dinner?" His question wasn't accusatory, but it was direct, a simple query that cut through the pretense in the room. The stepmother's expression shifted for a moment, only for a moment, but it was enough for Michael to catch it. Her calm demeanor faltered, just enough to notice. "Children have sensitive stomachs. You know that," she replied, her voice still smooth, but now tinged with the smallest hint of unease. Michael didn't nod. He didn't say anything. Instead, he walked to the table, to the chair, and pulled it out. The sound of the chair scraping across the floor was louder than it should have been. The dining room fell silent, the air thick with tension. "I'll go check on her," he said, his voice now carrying an edge, a warning in the way he spoke. It was quiet, but it was final. The stepmother froze. Her gaze flicked to the other guests. A forced, practiced smile returned to her face, but the moment of discomfort lingered in the air. "Michael, please, sit. You've just arrived," she said, attempting to regain control, to return to the picture-perfect image of calm family life. But Michael didn't sit. His eyes locked with hers. "I asked where my daughter is." The room went still. The guests glanced between them, but no one said anything. The stepmother sighed, her voice a little more clipped, a little less controlled. "She's upstairs, resting." Michael didn't nod. He didn't ask for more details. He simply turned and started to walk toward the stairs. "I'm going to check on her," he said again, his voice calm, but there was a quiet certainty in it. Before he reached the stairs, his stepmother's voice followed him. "Rosa," she said sharply, her gaze darting toward the maid, who was standing in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. "Stop him," the stepmother ordered. Rosa didn't move at first. She had heard the stepmother's commands before, loud and forceful, demanding compliance. But this time, Rosa didn't look away. Her eyes met Michael's, and in that brief moment, she saw the determination in his gaze. Rosa knew it was time. "Is my daughter upstairs?" Michael's voice was calm but forceful. Rosa didn't hesitate. She nodded, the guilt in her chest heavy but clear. "Yes, sir, she is." Michael's gaze hardened. "Then I'm going up to see her." His words were final, cutting through the tension in the room. He wasn't asking for permission. He was taking control of the situation. The stepmother's eyes flicked toward Rosa and then back to Michael. Her lips curled into a tight smile, but there was no warmth in it now. "You're overreacting," she said, her voice cold. "You've always had a tendency to dramatize things when it comes to her." Michael stopped in his tracks. He turned slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Do not tell me how to feel about my child," he said, his voice low and quiet. But the authority in his words was unmistakable. The stepmother's smile didn't falter, but her posture stiffened. The room held its breath, waiting for the next move. Michael turned back toward the stairs. Without a glance back, he started to climb. The stepmother opened her mouth, as if to say something, but the words never came. Michael reached the top of the stairs, his movements deliberate. Every step seemed to reverberate in the silence of the house. He didn't look back as he moved down the hallway toward the girls' room. And behind him, the stepmother stood frozen at the foot of the stairs, her face a mask of carefully hidden rage. Michael didn't knock when he reached the girls' room. He pushed the door open, and the sight before him made his stomach tighten with both anger and sorrow. The girl lay in her bed, her tiny form tucked beneath a thin blanket, her face pale, eyes closed. Her hands were curled tightly into the sheets, and her breathing was shallow, uneven. She looked smaller than he remembered, the exhaustion and hunger reflected in every inch of her fragile body. The room was sparse. There were no toys, no personal items to suggest she had ever felt at home here. Just the bare necessities. Rosa stood by the door, her hands folded in front of her, eyes downcast, as if afraid to intrude on the moment. Michael walked to the bed slowly, his gaze never leaving the girl. He reached out and gently touched her hand, his fingers brushing over her cold skin. "Lily." His voice was soft, filled with concern, but steady. She stirred at the sound of his voice, her eyelids fluttering open. She blinked several times, her gaze unfocused at first. When her eyes finally settled on his face, there was a moment of confusion, followed by something else, something small, fragile, but there nonetheless. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice cracked and hoarse. The moment the word left her lips, something inside Michael broke. He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening as he fought back the wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "I'm here," he said, his voice thick with a promise he had never broken. "I'm right here." Her fingers curled weakly around his, her grip surprisingly strong, as if she had been waiting for this moment for so long. "You came," she murmured, her voice barely a breath, but it carried so much more weight than anyone could understand. Michael nodded, his hand brushing her hair back gently from her face. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't need to. He was here now. That's all that mattered. He had been wrong to stay away, but that was in the past now. He was here, and he wouldn't leave her again. Behind him, the door creaked as it opened further, and Michael turned to see the stepmother standing in the doorway. Her face was a mask of practiced calm, but there was a flicker of something behind her eyes, a spark of recognition, of realization that the truth had finally arrived. "You're overreacting, Michael," she said, her voice high and defensive, but there was a subtle quiver in her tone now. "She's been tired. She's fine. It's just too much attention for her." Michael didn't answer. He turned back to Lily, his hand still wrapped around hers. He could feel the tremor in her fingers, the delicate pulse of her weakened state. "How long has this been happening?" Michael's voice was low, but there was steel in it now. He didn't need an answer from her, but he couldn't ignore the question. His gaze never left his daughter's face. "How long has my daughter been starved and neglected under your roof?" The stepmother's mask cracked just a little. The cracks were small, but they were there, and Michael could see them. "I've been trying to teach her discipline," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but the words carried a chilling sense of deflection. "She's been spoiled. She needed structure. She needed—" "Structure?" Michael cut her off, his voice firm now. "You've broken her. You've starved her, physically and emotionally. And for what? So you could control her? So you could break her spirit?" The stepmother opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She stepped back slightly, and in that moment, Michael saw the full extent of what had been happening. The cruel discipline, the isolation, the hunger, the manipulation. All of it had been justified in her mind as training, discipline, when it had been nothing more than punishment for a child who had done nothing but exist. Michael's gaze never wavered from his daughter. The anger he felt toward the stepmother was boiling inside him, but he kept it contained for Lily's sake. He wasn't here to fight. He was here to save her. The stepmother's eyes flicked toward Rosa, who stood by the door, her arms crossed, her expression solemn. "Rosa, you're part of this too," the stepmother said, her voice shaking. "You've seen her behavior. You've seen how she's been acting. She's been impossible to control. It's all her fault." But Rosa didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She didn't lower her gaze. She stood tall now, her voice soft but steady as she spoke. "You don't get to make her invisible anymore." The words hung in the air, and for the first time, the stepmother's gaze faltered. She didn't know how to respond, because Rosa was right. All of the control, all of the manipulation, everything the stepmother had done to break this girl, was about to be exposed. Michael stood, pulling Lily gently into his arms. She was so light, so fragile, but he held her with a steady hand. His heart clenched as he felt her weight in his arms, but he didn't show it. He couldn't show it. He had to be strong. For her, for both of them. "We're leaving," he said, his voice final. He looked at the stepmother one last time, his gaze unflinching. "This house is no longer a place for her. You're done here." The stepmother opened her mouth to speak, but Michael didn't wait for her words. He turned to Rosa, who nodded, and they walked out of the room together, the girl still nestled in Michael's arms. As they walked out of the house, the dining room was silent. The chairs, the plates, the laughter, it was all empty, just like the promises of belonging the stepmother had made. Outside, the sun was rising, casting a warm glow over everything. The house behind them, cold, sterile, and silent, was a symbol of everything they were leaving behind. And in Michael's arms, the girl clung to him, a tiny spark of hope igniting in her chest as she took her first steps toward a life where she wouldn't have to earn her place.